All right, so the next part that I wanted to point out takes place a few pages later, or a few paragraphs later, depending on what you are reading this on. And Guy Montag is on his way home from his shift at the fire station. And he comments that for the last few nights, he'd had the most uncertain feelings about the sidewalk just around the corner here, moving in the starlight toward his house. So there's this sense of foreshadowing. There's this premonition that we're given because this is building up towards something. And we see a similar idea in Wrinkle in Time where Meg and Charles Wallace and Calvin are all talking about this sense of anticipation that they've been waiting for something to happen. And in this case, Guy Montag, he's not sure what it is. He says, perhaps his nose detected a faint perfume. Perhaps the skin on the back of his hand felt the temperature rise, where someone standing might have raised the immediate atmosphere 10 degrees in an instant. So he keeps having this weird sense that someone had been there, even though he'd never actually seen anything distinctive. And then this sort of suspicion comes to a head where he finally turns the corner and there she is. And it's interesting that over and over again, Montag and Bradbury through Montag consistently refers to the whiteness of this girl. We'll see it over and over and over again. There's sort of a slender whiteness to her. And there's sort of a dual symbolism there. There's the symbolism, of course, white meaning purity, innocent, all that kind of thing. But also, because Montag is a fireman, we can also take it to the next level and go with the sort of a white, slender figure could also be like a candle, right? She's a single light. And that's sort of an interesting contrast to the immense flame that Montag had been dealing with earlier. And he actually initiates the communication. And the interesting thing is there's another recurring idea that Bradbury touches on, which is where Montag has the sense that this girl almost anticipates him, that everything that she reacts to, everything she does, it's almost as if he knew what he was going to say, what he was going to do. And they get into a conversation as they're walking along, and I love the first way that she explains herself, right? She says, I'm 17 and I'm crazy. My uncle says the two always go together. When people ask your age, she said, always say 17 and insane. And then she goes off on her own little conversation. Isn't this a nice time of night to walk? I love to smell things and look at things and stay up all night watching and walking and watching the sunrise. And it's important to understand that to Montag, this is completely baffling. And what's also baffling is to both of them is that he is not someone who scares her. And she says, most people are, but you're just a man after all. And what was interesting is the beginning when he was talking about his burning of the house, he wasn't even really a man, right? He was just an instrument. He was this terrifying instrument of destruction, which might explain why, in general, people tend to be somewhat terrified about encountering a fireman, right? Imagine coming across someone whose entire job is to gleefully destroy things. And so again, we see when Montag is looking at her and describing her, right? She says her face turned to him now. It was fragile milk crystal with a soft and constant light to it. It was not the hysterical light of electricity, but what? The strangely comfortable and rare and gently flattering light of the candle. So again, this symbolism of a single light, right? And instead of a destructive, terrifying flame, it's a gently flattering light that not only brings comfort, but makes Guy hope that the power doesn't come on too soon so he can sort of bask in this. And it makes us wonder if maybe that's how he feels about his interaction with Clarice, that maybe it's something he does not want to end too soon because it provides this temporary comfort. So in addition to Clarice, right, already being an odd girl who likes to watch the sunrise and walk around, she also asks the tricky questions. She says, is it true that long ago firemen put fires out instead of going to start them? And Montag responds, no, houses have always been fireproof. Take my word for it. And Clarice isn't completely convinced. She says, strange, I heard once a long time ago houses used to burn by accident and they needed firemen to stop the flames. And he laughs and she asks why he's laughing. And he stops and he looks at her and he says, don't you have any respect? Like, aren't you afraid of me? You're challenging history. You're challenging the established way that things are. And he even, by sort of implying his authority, right? He taps the numerals 451 on his char-colored sleeve, right? The 451 is the symbol of his office as a fireman, the law enforcement essentially in this time. And so she acknowledges that she's, she knows that, she knows she should be afraid. And then she completely changes the subject. And what's interesting is what she draws attention to is the way the world changes, right? That now she says, I think sometimes drivers don't know what grass is or flowers because they never see them slowly. Right? They see the whole world in blurs. And when her uncle, who seems to take a page out of her book and be a little bit peculiar, right, drove slowly on a highway once and got jailed for 2 days. And Montag is a little nervous that this insanity seems to run in the family. And right, then she points out these other things, right? There's dew on the grass in the morning. There's a man in the moon. And of course, all of these things are things that we are completely aware of. But for some reason, for Montag, her pointing out these day-to-day things in nature, in the world, makes him very uncomfortable. And although we know nothing about Montag and Clarice's world, we can deduce, right, that this is a world where there's something to be nervous about or uncomfortable about, slowing down and appreciating nature or thinking too hard about things, right? When they reach Clarice's house, right, Montag asks, what's going on? And Clarice says, oh, it's just my mother and father and uncle sitting around talking. It's like being a pedestrian, only rarer. My uncle was arrested another time, did I tell you, for being a pedestrian? Oh, we're most peculiar. He says, what do you talk about? And like, why would you talk? Which, is an interesting thing to think about even in modern times, right? How often do people just sit and talk as opposed to being preoccupied? And her final question that she finishes with is asking, are you happy? And he looks at her, right? She looks at him with wonder and curiosity, and based on his reaction, based on the emphasis put on the word what, he seems completely confused even at what the question is. And before he has a chance to respond, she's gone. So just in this first section, we see that Clarice has come along, spoiled Guy's blissful enjoyment of the flame, and he's very uncomfortable by her reminding him of the sort of everyday normal world where people do things like walk for the enjoyment and stop to look at things rather than blurring past them. And then the final question she asks, right, are you happy? Continues to hint at the idea that this 17-year-old crazy girl has disrupted the status quo for Guy.